you deliberately trying to spoil my evening? Why do you want to do me harm? Why do you hate me so?
I don't hate you.
Did you ever used to make resolutions?
Yeah?
Yeah. Like what?
Smoking cigarettes?
You quit that? Yeah.
James Stewart kept this actress photo on his desk until he died. She was the woman who saved his career, who fought studios for him, who coached him every night in secret. But their story hid a scandal Hollywood buried. She was married to his best friend. She lived 1 block away from Stewart for years. And when she died mysteriously at 50, Stewart never spoke her name again in public. The truth about what really happened between them stayed hidden for decades. Margaret Brooks Sullivan was born on 16th of May 1909 in Norfolk into a rich and powerful family. But her first years weren't filled with dances or laughter. She couldn't walk. Her legs were weak from birth. Doctors tried everything. They used stiff leg braces, electric treatments, even long hours in salty beach air, but nothing worked. She stayed in bed most of the time, lying on a couch in a dark nursery. It went on like that for almost 7 years. To pass time, she copied bird sounds. She listened to everything around her. Slowly, her senses sharpened. These were the skills that later made her famous on stage. When she finally stood up and walked on her own in March 1916, her father sent a message to Wall Street that said, "Margaret walked. Market can close up strong." Once she could run, she didn't stop. While other rich kids were being trained to be proper ladies, Margaret was sliding down coal chutes and chasing trolleys. She played stickball with black and immigrant children on Brambleton Avenue. She arrived in a Pierce Arrow car, took off her shoes, and hid them behind trash cans so she could run barefoot. When her mother invited other girls to a tea party in 1924, Margaret skipped it. She went to a boxing match instead and came back with a split lip. Her mother wrote in her diary that night, "She will not be received at Mrs. Astor's, ever." In 1927, her parents planned a huge party for her at the Norfolk Yacht and Country Club. Flowers were flown from Hawaii. The Marine Band was coming from Washington. But Margaret had other plans. She sold her gowns to a vintage shop in Richmond and used the money to enroll at Sullins College. It was a small women's college in Bristol, with no ballroom and no glamour. But it had a tiny drama club. She studied acting and hosted candlelit readings of Shaw and Ibsen in the attic. She even got in trouble for pretending to be men during the plays. In June 1929, she stood by the road with her thumb out and hitchhiked to Cape Cod. She wanted to audition for the University Players, a theater group that used a $12,000 wooden building near Old Silver Beach. She got a role. Her co-star was a 24-year-old named Henry Fonda. Jimmy Stewart, shy and quiet, showed up soon after to help build the sets. Everyone lived in tiny beach shacks, shared one bathroom, and ate clam chowder made from whatever they found in the sand. They were fined 25 cents for every missed line. That money bought kerosene for the lights. Those nights around the fire built friendships that lasted for decades. Sullivan pushed Stewart hard. She forced him to say his lines faster. He said she cured his stammer. Her Broadway debut came on 12th of January 1926. It wasn't a quiet, elegant play. It was a wild musical called Hello, Lola. Margaret stood out right away. Critics called her a delinquent cherub. The show ran 47 nights, which was pretty good for the time, but in 1931, she took a big risk. She starred in a bold feminist play called A Modern Virgin. Her character talked about birth control in front of Wall Street men. Some people in the audience yelled, "Harlot," and the play shut down after 29 shows. Her parents left halfway through, embarrassed. But director Frank Borzage noticed her courage. Years later, he cast her in The Mortal Storm with Jimmy Stewart. Margaret arrived in Hollywood on 16th of May 1933, her 24th birthday. She went straight to Universal to watch the first cuts of her movie, Only Yesterday. She hated what she saw. To her, it looked fake. She thought her acting seemed stiff and her face looked older. She went to the studio and offered $2,500 to cancel her contract. That was more than most Americans made in a year during the Great Depression. They said no. They had already spent more than that on her wardrobe and tests. Furious, she left the studio, packed her car, and bought a ticket back to New York. Someone from the studio stopped her at the airport. After a long talk, she agreed to stay, but only if she could approve the script and avoid long retakes. That was rare for a newcomer. Back then, studios trapped young actresses in 5-year deals. They paid $350 a week and controlled everything. Paramount and Columbia even offered her $1,000 a week. She said no. She wanted freedom. Instead, she signed a 3-year contract with Universal. She got $1,200 a week, only had to do 2 films per year, and could spend every summer acting in plays. In 1936, she used that deal to leave town and perform in stage door for 169 shows. When she came back, she made Next Time We Love. Lawyers hated her contract, agents loved it. They copied it for other stars. Today, law books still mention it as one of the first contracts that gave power back to actors. Sullivan once said, "Acting in the movies is just like ditch digging." She meant it. She hated the slow pace, the heat, and the endless retakes. During Only Yesterday, she used a stopwatch to time how long it took between cut and action. For every minute of usable footage, she had to wait 37 minutes. She showed the numbers to the crew. Even after she was nominated for an Oscar for 3 Comrades, she kept her apartment in New York. She said she would rather act in front of a live audience 120 times for $1,000 than fake 1 tear in front of a camera for twice that. Even MGM's powerful boss, Louis B. Mayer, couldn't control her. In 1938, he tried to force her into a role next to Clark Gable. She pointed to a clause in her contract and refused. Mayer lost his temper, slammed a folder on the table, and tried to scare her. She stayed calm. She said she'd leave Hollywood that same day and give up all her pay before she played a part she didn't like. His hand was shaking when he signed her release. The whole town heard about it. Variety ran a headline, "Sullivan plays hardball with LB." Other stars started asking for more control, just like she had. It was a freezing night in late 1932. A few young actors huddled near a radiator behind a Broadway stage door. They had just finished rehearsing a small comedy play called Carrie Nation. Among them was a tall, awkward 23-year-old named James Stewart. He wasn't sure he belonged there. His voice trembled on stage. His lines didn't land. He quietly told the others that maybe he'd quit and go back to school to finish engineering at Princeton. But before he could finish the thought, Margaret Sullivan, just a year older, looked at him and said, "Jim, in 5 years, you'll be Hollywood's biggest discovery. Remember, I said it." Nobody laughed. Nobody even questioned it. She said it like it was already true. Back then, Stewart had failed 5 straight Broadway auditions. He made just $35 a week, but Sullivan didn't flinch. 4 years later, Stewart was tired of waiting. By January 1936, he had been buried in 8 forgettable MGM films. He was frustrated and wanted out. He told a talent scout he wanted to break his 7-year contract, but Sullivan wasn't having it. She was now Universal's biggest female star, and she made her move. She walked straight to Carl Laemmle Jr., the head of Universal, and gave him an ultimatum. If he didn't get Stewart to play her co-star in Next Time We Love, she'd walk off the set at exactly 6 p.m. on January 9th. That would shut down filming and leave 180 people without work. The film was already over budget. If it stalled, it would cost Universal thousands in penalties. So Laemmle picked up the phone and called MGM. He begged them to loan Stewart for just 2 weeks. He offered to trade Ray Milland in return and pay Stewart $1,250 per week. MGM gave in at 4:42 p.m. on January 8th. Sullivan signed her contract 41 minutes before her deadline. Later, Universal admitted the gamble cost $22,500 in overtime, but it was worth every cent. They said no PR campaign could have bought the buzz that came from that performance. Stewart had the chance. Now he had to deliver. But his nerves weren't gone. On set, director Edward Griffith kept snapping at him. "You're wobbling like a windmill. He'd yell when Stewart's tall frame drifted out of place. Sullivan didn't argue. She just helped. Every night after filming, she invited him to her bungalow at 4B on Melrose Avenue. Under a bare 60-watt bulb, they practiced lines from 7 p.m. to midnight. She showed him how to turn his nervous throat clearing into quiet pauses, how to drop the stage voice and speak like someone talking to a friend. She even tied a silk scarf around his knees so he could feel when he locked his legs on camera. They created a pacing sheet together, full of handwritten notes, arrows, and beat marks. That sheet still exists in her archived papers. On February 3rd, they reshot scene 42. Stewart nailed it in one take. The crew clapped. The director didn't ask for a second take. He printed the first slate to save film. Something changed in him after that. People noticed it again while shooting The Shop-Worn Angel in early 1938. Walter Pidgeon, a veteran actor, watched Stewart rehearse and leaned toward the script girl. "Look at Jimmy," he said. "He lights up the second Maggie walks in." Stewart usually kept to himself between takes, but not when Sullivan was around. He joked with her. He added lines. His eyes glowed under the lights. The camera crew saw it too. One cameraman said Stewart seemed to shine when she was in the frame. They didn't need retakes when the two were together. MGM saved around $8,000 that week just in film stock. People started whispering. Rumors drifted into the studio offices. Extra chaperones were assigned to their night shoots, but the chemistry couldn't be hidden. It's what made the film so real. Not everyone was happy about it. Sullivan had married director William Wyler back in 1934. Their marriage was already on shaky ground by the end of 1935, and Stewart wasn't helping. After filming wrapped, Sullivan kept coaching Stewart privately at her home on Beverly Drive. But Wyler started showing up. He'd park across the street in his Packard and watch the lights in the bungalow. One night, someone said he barged onto a Universal set and barked at Stewart. "If you love rehearsal so much, do it on your own time." Things boiled over on January 28, 1936, during a voice dubbing session. Wyler exploded. He accused Sullivan of secretly directing Stewart. The studio boss had to step in, but it was too late. Wyler filed for divorce just weeks later. The official reason was mental cruelty and neglect. But no one missed the real meaning. He thought there was something real between his wife and Stewart. That could have been the end of the story. But it got stranger. Just 8 months after the divorce, Sullivan married someone else, Leland Hayward, a powerful Hollywood agent. They bought a house at 1143 Roxbury Drive. The twist? Stewart was already renting a house just 1 block away at 911 Roxbury. The mailman joked that Stewart's fan letters sometimes went to the Haywards by mistake. His baby blue Plymouth was seen outside their house almost every night. Columnists noticed. One even wrote that Mrs. Hayward's platinum hair and Mr. Stewart's shy smile had been spotted under the moonlight more than once. The three of them tried to stay polite. They even played Sunday croquet together. Stewart would team up with Hayward to play against Sullivan and David Niven. But behind the laughs, the rumors never stopped. As Stewart's career exploded in 1939, MGM told him to move. They didn't want any scandals before Mr. Smith Goes to Washington came out. When James Stewart first stepped onto the Universal lot in August 1935, he was 27 and unsure of himself. He had only 17 lines of screen dialogue to his name. He spoke too slowly, moved too broadly, and the director almost replaced him by the end of the first week. But Margaret Sullivan didn't let that happen. She was already an Oscar nominee. She saw something in him. Every night, she called him to her dressing room. They ran lines together. She made him rehearse tongue twisters with a cork in his teeth to fix the stammer that would later make him famous. Slowly, he changed. Studio memos dated September 13th said he was now carrying romantic weight. When the movie came out on January 16, 1936, Variety praised his fresh, sincere appeal. One MGM executive said he barely recognized the man who came back. From that point on, Stewart kept a photo of him and Sullivan. Taken during a break on stage 12, framed on his desk until he died in 1997. 2 years later, they worked together again in a film called The Shop-Worn Angel. Filming started on May 31st, 1938. By the second week, their co-star Walter Pidgeon told friends he felt invisible. Every scene drifted toward Stewart and Sullivan. They didn't mean to steal the spotlight, but it just happened. Even when the director tried changing the camera angles to give Pidgeon more space. Preview cards from July 21st only talked about Jimmy and Maggie's magic. After filming, Stewart would wait outside her dressing room just to walk her to her car, even though her husband was there. Life magazine ran a photo spread with the title, "A Love Too Tender for War." It had 8 photos of Sullivan and Stewart. Pidgeon got one. Fan mail jumped from 200 letters a week to 1,900 the month the movie came out, November 5th, 1938. The film made a modest $1.2 million, but what people remembered most was the chemistry. That's when Hollywood realized this pairing could overpower anyone else on screen. Then came The Shop Around the Corner in 1940. Ernst Lubitsch directed it. He told a reporter on January 17, the day of the press junket, that this was the best film he'd ever made. That meant something. He had made Ninotchka and Trouble in Paradise. The scenes between Sullivan and Stewart were sharp but gentle. For one key moment, she insisted on rehearsing it 37 times to get the rhythm right. Stewart improvised the final line, "I've been looking all over for you," and it landed like a whisper wrapped in thunder. The opening week in New York only brought in $27,000, but people talked. Word spread. By the end of the year, it was on the top 10 lists of the New York Times, Film Daily, and the National Board of Review. In 1999, it was added to the National Film Registry. Lubitsch never worked with them again. He once told Billy Wilder, "I couldn't top that chemistry if I lived to be 100. Later that year came The Mortal Storm. It premiered on June 14, 1940, just 3 weeks before Hitler entered Paris. It was the first major MGM film to show the Nazis as they really were. Sullivan and Stewart played lovers trapped in 1933 Germany. Director Frank Borzage told them to underplay everything, to speak like the words were burning their mouths. In one scene, Sullivan says, "You're fighting something bigger than all of us." Audiences sat frozen for 20 seconds. Germany responded quickly. On June 30th, Joseph Goebbels banned every MGM movie from the country. That single decision cost the studio $1.4 million overnight. But in America, the effect was different. Colleges saw a 60% rise in students signing up for classes about European affairs. Stewart left for the Army by December. Sullivan left Hollywood and returned to Broadway. Their final scene together showed them clinging to each other on a snowy pass as gunfire echoed. It felt like goodbye, and it was. But their story didn't start on a movie set. It started in Baltimore Christmas Day, 1931. Margaret Sullivan married Henry Fonda while on tour with the University Players. It lasted 15 months. They argued about everything: lines, toothpaste, life. But they shaped each other. Fonda learned he had a temper. Sullivan learned how far she could push someone. Fonda taught her how to walk on her hands. She helped him through stage fright. They even hosted James Stewart on their sofa. After they split in March 1933, Fonda still named his daughter Bridget after Sullivan's future child. Jane Fonda called her Aunt Maggie for years. The marriage ended, but its roots kept growing. Then came William Wyler. On November 25, 1934, he and Sullivan got married in Yuma, Arizona. The ceremony was so quick. A crackling radio almost drowned it out. The marriage didn't last long. Wyler hated that she made more money than he did. She started spending long nights coaching Stewart. Then she ended a pregnancy without telling Wyler. He found out through studio gossip. The divorce came through on March 13, 1936. They never worked together again. Years later, Wyler said she was the only actress who broke his heart. Meanwhile, Stewart admitted he tried to propose during those late-night sessions. None of them ever quite got over it. In November 1936, Sullivan married Leland Hayward, a powerful agent. She was already pregnant. Brooke was born 7 months later. Then came Bridget in 1940 and Bill in 1941. Hayward gave her everything: money, contracts, a Broadway role just for her. But he was always working. She was left raising the kids while going deaf. In August 1947, she found a love letter in his briefcase. It was from Nancy Slim Keith. Within 48 hours, Sullivan filed for divorce. It became official on April 20th, 1948. Hayward married Keith 9 months later. Gossip columnist Luella Parsons wrote, "He traded the most husky voice in Hollywood for the slimmest waist in New York." But the damage was deep. Sullivan had a breakdown in 1955. Her kids later ended up in psychiatric care. Brooke wrote a book about it called Haywire in 1977. By 1949, Sullivan wanted peace. She met Kenneth Wagg, a quiet English banker. They had tea at the Savoy in London. They married on August 30th, 1950. He promised her no scripts, no agents, just Mozart and gardens. She was just 32 when she shocked MGM. At the peak of her fame, with theaters ranking her above names like Joan Fontaine and Ingrid Bergman, she turned down every new film offer. She said she wanted to have supper with her children every night. People thought she was walking away. But it wasn't a retreat. It was a move that let her earn more money, stay with her kids, and keep her freedom. In 1943 and 1944, she starred in a Broadway play called The Voice of the Turtle. It ran for 635 shows and made around $2.3 million. That's close to $40 million today. Columbia Pictures begged her to turn it into a film. She said no. She said that role belonged to the stage. And she wasn't bluffing. Her weekly salary on Broadway was $4,000, more than what she'd earn under a Hollywood contract. But behind all this strength was a silent battle. Margaret Sullivan had otosclerosis. It's a condition where bone grows abnormally in the ear, slowly taking away your hearing. It started in her 20s. By 1957, she had lost 40% of her hearing in the left ear and 35% in the right. She never told the public. She feared it would cost her the stage roles she lived for. So she adapted. She stood closer to the front of the stage to feel the vibrations. She redesigned her clothes so her neck stayed visible, just so she could lip-read her scene partners. She even changed her voice, lowering it so she could still hear herself speak. Theaters dimmed their cue lights for her. Stage managers learned to gently tap her wrist instead of whispering. But hiding the truth had a cost. Dr. Julius Lempert later said that staying quiet likely delayed her treatment by 5 years. Her struggle, though silent, helped change things. In 1962, 2 years after she died, Actors' Equity made hearing screenings a standard part of health checks. In 1950, Columbia Pictures finally convinced her to return to the screen. She set her terms. The shoot would last 1 month. She wanted full control of the script, and she demanded a flat fee of $150,000. That was a massive ask, especially since she hadn't done a movie in 7 years. The story she chose was dark, a mother arranging her family's future after learning she had terminal cancer. The filming ended on 19th of November 1950. Exactly 331 days later, on 1st of January 1960, Sullivan was found dead. Barbiturate overdose. She was 50. That wasn't the only eerie detail. During filming, the medical chart used as a prop listed the character's death date as January 1st. Even the film's early title had been Prelude to Darkness. The studio changed it at the last minute. Critics had called the story too morbid, but in time, the story mirrored her life, almost too perfectly. In March 1955, something broke inside her. She collapsed after hearing that 2 of her teenage children wanted to live with their father, Leland Hayward. Her daughter Brooke later said the crying was so loud, she had to cover her ears. Margaret crawled under her bed and refused to come out. Friends got her admitted, quietly, into the Payne Whitney Psychiatric Clinic in New York. She was listed under a fake name. The press never found out. She stayed for 10 weeks. It cost more than $15,000 back then, or about $180,000 today. She insisted on a private room, her own nurse, and 2 sessions a day with Dr. Frederick Hacker, who specialized in depression. When she finally left in mid-May, she was told to rest and avoid work, but the damage was done. Hayward had already filed for full custody. Not even Hollywood's biggest gossip writers caught wind of her breakdown. The truth only came out in her daughter's 1977 memoir. The custody fight dragged on. It shattered what little strength she had left. The hearings went from late 1955 through early 1957. Hayward's lawyers even used her hearing loss against her. They claimed she couldn't be trusted to care for kids because she might not hear them cry. Judge Harold Kaufman ruled in Hayward's favor. Margaret was allowed to see her kids only on holidays. A letter she wrote to Jimmy Stewart in December 1956 said everything. When they left, the house closed in. It is so still, it screams. Within weeks, she dropped to 92 pounds. Her doctor noted suicidal thoughts. Brooke remembered her pacing at night, convinced someone was on the roof. She called her ex-husband Henry Fonda at dawn, certain her phone was tapped. She stuffed towels into the windows. She jammed kitchen knives into door frames, saying they'd block the listening devices. Her grief and her hearing loss had twisted into something unbearable. In February 1957, she was rehearsing for The Deep Blue Sea. Audiograms showed that she could only hear about 15% from her right ear. Her left ear was even worse. The producers offered to replace her and still pay her. She said no. "I'd rather miss cues than miss rent." The play opened in March, and critics praised her intensity. What they didn't know was that she was often guessing her lines by reading lips. She kept going because she had to. Divorces from Henry Fonda, William Wyler, and Leland Hayward had drained her savings. She was also paying tuition for 3 children. Even though her doctors warned her to avoid loud noise, she took a summer tour. The orchestra pits were so loud they made her condition worse. By the end of that season, she needed a special bone conduction headset backstage, something that would later become normal for deaf actors. On the first day of 1960, just after 5:30 in the evening, her housekeeper unlocked room 2612 at the Taft Hotel in New Haven. Margaret hadn't answered any knocks. Inside, she was lying across the bed in her cardigan and rehearsal pants. Her script for Sweet Love Remembered was open to page 78. Her next line was circled in red. There was a glass of ginger ale on the table, and a secondal bottle that had been filled 2 days earlier with 30 capsules. Only 16 were left. The room was hot, 82 degrees. She had turned the heat up to soothe the pain in her ears. She had lost more than 40% of her hearing since 1948. Her husband, Kenneth Wagg, had dined with her just before 4 p.m. When he returned less than 2 hours later, the door was locked from inside. Paramedics got her to the hospital nearby, but it was too late. She was declared dead at 6:05 p.m., the first celebrity to die in the new decade.